A soothsayer, visit from shadow people, and a demonic possession. These are some stories from the Philippines. Hello, I'm from Southeast Asia, but with Chinese heritage, so if I make confusing cultural references, please view it from this context. A. The Soothsayer. When I was a young girl, my mother would always make the trip to the Soothsayer whenever she goes to the capital. The Soothsayer is a small, wrinkly old lady with wispy white hair and a bent back. She lived alone in her old wooden apartment located in the middle of Divisoria, a dirty, bustling commercial district in the city of Manila. I remember the apartment smelling of old people and incense. Whenever she told her fortunes, the tiny soothsayer would sit in a huge wooden throne and enter into some sort of catatonic state. Her eyes would roll back, her claw-like hands would grasp the arms of the wooden throne, and her head would bob up and down, and in the midst of the noise outside, a shaky but commanding voice would give out all sorts of advice. My mother says that it is the god Santai who is speaking through the soothsayer. That is why all of her advice and predictions should be taken seriously. To be honest, there are a lot of conflicting things about my mother. That is why at first I found it hard to understand why my mother would make special trips to see the soothsayer. She says she doesn't believe in spirits or ghosts, but she believes in a god possessing this little old lady. She says she's a devout Catholic, but she also believes in this Taoist god called Santai. In any case, my mother is always following the advice of the soothsayer, and got the result she wanted. My brother and I are prime examples. After my older sister was born, my mother kept having miscarriages. She finally bore a boy, but he died within a day of being born. Distraught, my mother sought the advice of the soothsayer. She told my mother that she had offended a spirit, and as long as her child is a boy, she would always lose the baby. They then did some rituals to appease the spirit. The soothsayer said that as she slept on it, and if my mother dreamt of a red flower, her next child would be a girl. If she dreamt of a white flower, then the spirit had been dealt with and her next child would be a boy. My mother dreamt of a white flower a few nights after performing the ritual, and a few months later she gave birth to my only brother. When my mother was in her mid-40s, she suddenly wanted another child. She again approached the soothsayer, asking for one. Again the rituals were done, and a few months later she was pregnant with me. I'm not sure what my mother did during those rituals, but apparently it made me sensitive to spirits. For most of my childhood, I was not allowed to go near cemeteries. My parents were extremely strict with this rule. I remember that there were many instances where people or entities, I'm not entirely sure, would try to convince me to go with them. They would try to entice me with food or toys, but I would never go with them. This may be connected to my encounters with the shadow people in my next story, but who knows? B. The shadow people. I have encountered shadow people 3 times in my life. The first was when I was 4 years old. I was playing alone behind my school when a lady approached me, trying to get me to go with her. She was entirely black and featureless, almost too dimensional. I ran the heck out of there and cried for my nanny. The second time was when I joined a Catholic retreat in high school. It was 5 a.m. and I was the only person awake at the time. I sat down in the middle of the retreat's houseflower garden, enjoying the fresh mountain air and the chirping birds. Suddenly, everything went silent, and I saw a black humanoid figure approaching me. This time it was a man, under the streaming orange lamps. It was entirely pitch black again, almost two-dimensional. Of course, I ran back to my room and woke up my roommates and prayed all the prayers I knew by heart until we were called for breakfast. The third and last time was when I was in grade school. It was midnight and I was laying in bed, scrolling through Reddit, when I spotted something at the foot of my bed. The white fluorescent lamp lit up the whole room except for the pitch-black humanoid figure standing at the foot of my bed. I hid under the covers and prayed to our Father and Hail Mary over and over until it disappeared. See, my father gets possessed. This all happened before I was born, back when my dad used to be a trucker. He would leave us for a few days a week, making deliveries to our clients who lived in the mountains of our province. One day my mother woke up to a rude, loud knock on our door. Through the peephole she saw that it was my father, back home 2 days early, and drenched in sweat. My mother opened the door and greeted him, asking why he was home so early, but my dad just went past her, straight to his room. My mum, thinking that he was just tired, left him alone. However, my dad was asleep for more than 24 hours. The whole time he would mumble to himself, and sometimes he would shout, "No, don't take me. I don't want to go with you." My mum, scared out of her wits, called the local Sahano, or witch doctor, to take a look at my dad. He would not wake up at all, but kept mumbling. The whole time he was drenched in sweat, and the room started to smell awful. The Sahano tied each of my dad's arms and legs to the bedpost and restarted his ritual. He recited Catholic prayers while whipping my dad with a bantok ang pagi, or dried stingray's tail. My dad woke up screaming in tongues. His face was contorted as if he was burning and in extreme pain. His body then suddenly went erect and he collapsed. The Sohano then wrapped up his ritual and told my mother that the demon had been cast out. My dad slept peacefully for another day. When he woke up, he was surprised to find himself at home. My mother asked him if he had recalled anything about what had happened to him, and he just said the last thing he remembered was driving his truck up into the mountains. My mother never told him what happened, not even in my dad's dying days. I have a few more stories, but I think this post is getting too long. These are the more interesting ones anyway. Thanks for reading and making it this far. There are a couple of edits. Edit 1. I posted another story on an encounter with a goat man in the Philippine mountains, if anybody wants to read more. Edit 2. Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot about rule number 5 and had to take it down before the mods banded me. I'll post this as a comment instead. Reader's notes. Hey all, Grimm here. I looked in the comment section and through the paranormal read it and I couldn't find the goat man story, so sorry about that. My grandfather's ex-girlfriend wasn't human. Hello, this is my first time posting in the sub, and I wanted to share a story that chilled me to the bone, with the permission of my grandfather, of course. I'm a bit skeptical about the story, but the more I thought about it, the more horrifying it is. For a bit of backstory, I'm half Filipino and half American. Every summer, my parents and I would visit the Philippines and usually stay at my grandparents' place. A week ago, my grandfather on my mother's side told me this true story from his youth. The way he said it, I noticed that he was still shaken and scared from whatever happened. So here's the story. Back in 1970, when my grandfather was 18, he was dating a girl who was a year younger than him for over a year. Let's call this girl Sarah. Sarah was beautiful, sweet, kind, and easy on the eyes, according to my grandfather. When summer started, Sarah invited him to her parents' home in the province. Sarah was currently staying with her aunt while she went to school in my grandfather's town. My grandfather was skeptical at first because the area that Sarah lived was quite rural and would take about 5 hours to arrive to by bus. But my grandfather was infatuated with Sarah, so he said, why the hell not? So, with the permission from his parents, he packed up and then he and Sarah were on their way. When they arrived at her home, he noticed a lot of people were staring at them. It was a small town, so the population wasn't that big. Sarah showed him around where the shops were, diners, etc., but grandfather would notice people staring at them, and at one time he heard a couple whisper, Aswang. If you're wondering what the hell an Aswang is, in Filipino folklore, an Aswang is a malevolent, shape-shifting, fish-eating monster. From what I learned, by the day they look and act like normal people. However, at night they reveal them true selves. Back to the story. So Sarah and my grandfather arrived at Sarah's house. It was a 3-story, large wooden home. My grandfather then met Sarah's parents. They greeted him warmly and invited him in, and exchanged talks over dinner. Grandfather said they seemed like a couple of nice, normal people. On the first night, he was sleeping in Sarah's room on the 2nd floor. My grandfather woke up hearing strange noises. The first thing he noticed was that Sarah was gone. He assumed that she must have gone to the bathroom, so he lay down. But the weird sound continued. It was coming from the floor above him. He said that it sounded like a cat scratching his claws on the wooden floor, accompanied by what sounded like a person mumbling. He tried to ignore it, but it started getting louder until he could hear multiple clawing noises from above, like multiple cats scratching on the wooden floors as well as mumbling. Sarah still hasn't come back at this point, which made him worried. That's when he heard loud thumping from upstairs, like a person jumping. My grandfather is really weirded out by this at this point, so he covers his ears with his pillow. The next day, he told Sarah that their cats were really loud and that he couldn't sleep. Sarah just looked at him confused and said, "We don't have cats." "Huh, that's weird. I could have sworn I heard cats last night," he replied. On the second night, He was woken up again by the same sounds. He says at this point he was just thinking to himself, what the hell? Then he hears loud grunting from above, like an animal in pain. He tries to go back to sleep, but then he is startled by what sounded like a roar. This continues for another day until the fourth night. Grandpa decided he had enough and he was going to man up and march upstairs to see what the hell was going on. So it was around 1 in the morning, according to him. He said it was strange because he didn't hear any more of the weird sounds, but he decided to go upstairs anyway. He tiptoed across the floor and reached the stairs leading to the 3rd floor. Once he reached the 3rd floor, he noticed something weird. The lights wouldn't work, even though they were working fine beforehand and before he went to bed. The only source of light was the moonlight which illuminated the interior. He makes his way to the room that was above him on the 2nd floor, where the sounds were coming from, and what he saw made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The floor was littered with claw marks, the windows were wide open, and there were blood stains across the floor. There were no signs of Sarah or her appearance anywhere. Freaked out, he went back down to the 2nd floor. But then his nose caught a whiff of something he hadn't noticed before. It was coming from the kitchen. Curious, he went to take a look, but it was so dark he could barely make anything out. As he walked, his hand touched something that felt like a large metal pot. He opened the lid. A great number of flies escape, and his nose is assaulted with an extremely awful, putrid smell that he said nearly made him vomit. It was so dark that he couldn't see what was inside the pot, so he immediately slammed down the lid and ran back to the room and forced himself to sleep. The next day, during lunch, Sarah's mother served dinugan, animal blood that has been cooked and mixed with herbs and spices. But my grandfather excused himself and lied, saying that he was feeling sick. He didn't want to know what was in the food. Sarah's mother tried to coax him into eating, saying that he'll regain his energy. This is when my grandfather takes the opportunity to find out the truth. You see, in the folklore, to identify whether or not a person is an Aswang is quite simple. You observe their eyes. If your reflection is upside down, then they are an Aswang. My grandfather stared at Sarah's mum straight in the eyes and reeled back in horror. His reflection was upside down. This is when the mother's expressions changed completely. She went from concerned to angry and was glaring hard at my grandfather with an expression that basically said, and I say this according to him, "You shouldn't have done that." That night, my grandfather doesn't waste any time and immediately packs and heads home, lying that there's been a family emergency in order for him to go. He finally returns home, spent a lot of time inside his house in complete fear. In the following months, he breaks up with Sarah. She looked at him with sadness, and she said that she understands that it was a wise choice for him, but it was quite a shame. My grandfather ends the story there. He does admit that it was a huge shame indeed, because he really wanted to marry Sarah. Well, what do you all think? What are your thoughts and opinions about this story? There is an edit. So I asked my grandfather for more details about the story. He said that he has trouble remembering a couple of things, but from what he could recall, After the first night, he asked Sarah where she had been, because he woke up and couldn't find her. Sarah said she was in the bathroom due to an irritable stomach. He then asked about the weird noises that night and asked if she heard them. He said she was quiet to this question for a moment, before casually responding with something along the likes of a group of cats climbed onto the roof or something like that. He always felt that that was quite a weird excuse. Filipino dwarf, a duwende. Living in the Philippines, I have gotten closer to the paranormal phenomena than I ever would have imagined. I lived in a house that was shared with a traditional creature called a duwende, or dwarf. Many people claim that they saw doors opening and closing by themselves in that house, but I chalked it up to imagination and or gusts of wind until the following happened to me. I went into the bathroom to change shorts, and immediately I felt someone trying to push open the door from the outside. I thought it was someone in our house. I shouted to them that somebody was in there and then pushed back against the door. For 2 seconds I felt someone strong push back against me. Then, suddenly there was no pressure at all. Immediately I opened the door and no one was there. In fact, no one was home at all. On another occasion, I was sitting alone in the living room late at night after 1 a.m. I happened to be looking at the refrigerator. Without warning, no funny feelings or anything in my part, I sat there and watched as a shot glass levitated itself off the surface of the refrigerator. There were 8 shot glasses lined up in 2 rows of 4. One glass in the back row just raised itself into the air almost 2 inches, hung there in the air for a couple of seconds as if to make sure that I was watching. Then flung itself over the back of the fridge and shattered on the wall and left broken glass scraps all over the floor. I was just frozen. I sat there and watched. Out of nowhere, a glass suddenly fly, lift itself into the air, hang there, and then smash itself into a wall. Afterwards, I spoke to my girlfriend, and she told me that it was most likely duwende, and that he was telling me that it was his place. She didn't see anything unusual at all about the glass lifting itself into the air. Apparently, that's just what dwarfs do. My brother and I were punished by a duwende. Ilocos Sur, Philippines. Hey everyone. This is a story from when my brother and I were kids visiting the Philippines, where our parents came from, Ilocos Sur, Luzon. We were elementary school age at the time, and so is this memory. This area is very country, with rice fields and such. There were rarely any buildings higher than 1 story. The street that the family house was on was dirt and unnamed. Our older cousin made my brother and I some slingshots. I loved that thing. It was made from the branches of some trees and elastic from a local store. After terrorizing the local animals, I got into some trouble, and so I found this big discarded metal vegetable oil can for target practice. I set up the oil can on top of a small table and put it in front of this bamboo clump. It made a nice loud metallic clunk noise, so we had a blast until some of our older cousins came along. They said that we probably shouldn't be shooting there because a duwende lives there. Being little know-it-all city punks, I decided to ignore them. Besides, I was having fun. My little brother, of course, decided to follow my lead. Nothing happened until the following morning. My memory is also a little spotty, and you'll soon understand why. I wake up with a really bad fever. I remember profusely sweating and having a pounding headache. I feel so weak I had a hard time moving unassisted. I couldn't even sit up. I remember my shirt being changed frequently. I was sweating so bad. I remember old women crowding into the room and praying over me. I remember candles with Virgin Mary being lit. I remember being hit with big leaves. They might have been malangai leaves. I remember being made to drink this dark, reddish, aromatic tea. I remember being carried to the bathroom to bathe in the same dark, reddish, aromatic tea. Then I remember one morning feeling absolutely fine. It was as if nothing happened. I don't know how long I was sick for. It may have been days, it may have been just 24 hours, one and done. I really don't remember. As for my brother, he didn't get sick, but one of his eyes got severely swollen. It was like he was smuggling a cue ball behind that thing. He said it didn't hurt when I asked him. His vision wasn't impaired, but boy did that thing get huge. No one really knew what to make of it, and were kind of freaking out until Grandpa came to the rescue. He came with his small vial of rose oil that he had put on top of the swollen area. The following morning, my brother's eye was completely back to normal. Our grandfather said he went to the bamboo clump with the rose oil and asked the duwende for forgiveness for his dumbass grandsons. He prayed there for hours until he felt like something had happened. That's when he came back with the rose oil. At least that's what people said when I asked. When I got older, they also said that my brother's eye got swollen because he accidentally hit the duwende in the eye while we were doing our target practice. Even though this happened decades ago, and that bamboo clump no longer exists, I still treat that area with reverence and respect. I will greet and say my farewells to the duwende every time I pass through, because I have to say, you never know, and it's the right thing to do. So remember, if you feel you're walking into the home of a duwende, say tabi tabi po, and thank them for letting you enter their territory. The Tayanak is a vampire creature in the Philippines. It is a part of their mythology that takes on the form of a toddler or baby. Although there are various types, it typically takes on the form of a newborn baby and cries in the jungle to attract unwary travelers. Once it is picked up by an unfortunate passerby, it reverts to its true form and attacks the victim. The Tayanak is also depicted to take maleficent delight in leading travelers astray or in abducting children. Hello everyone, Grimm here. Thank you all for making it to the end of this video. That last one wasn't really a story, more of folklore history for the Philippines. So I hope you like that little additive at the end. I'm not going to add too many facts when I do these videos. I just really like that, and I think these creatures are, whilst terrifying, pretty cool. So, I've got something a little bit exciting to announce. But before that, remember, if you made it this far, like and subscribe. It really helps us out, and if you enjoyed the video, it means you'll be able to see more of them. But this is where my announcement starts. By the time this is released, my birthday will officially have started. I don't have anything too cool to give away. I just wanted to share that so that everyone would get to know me a little bit better. As for what to put in the chat this time, let us use the word chop. C-H-O-P. You can use that in the way of chop, as in chop wood, chop sticks, or even chop as in lamb chop. Just put it in and have a little bit of fun with it. Alright, I won't drag this out. Have yourself an amazing night or day, wherever you are. Be safe, and remember that I am Grimm, and as always, I am signing off.